Shabbat Shalom for those of you who are joining us on YouTube. I'm excited to once again come together with you guys and experience a Mikra Kodesh, a holy convocation, a corporate collective connectedness of the exposition or the expository examination of the mystical side of Torah. We began this at the beginning of the Torah cycle. During Sukkot, I was given this message and realized that it was going to be more than one sermon, but one of the things that's intriguing is how things turn out. And what I mean by that is like for the first one, I already knew the direction that the sermon was going to go. I wasn't sure exactly, because you guys know I don't prepare my messages, but I wasn't sure exactly which way it was going to go, but I knew I had something. The second week, I had a confirmation that had nothing to do with the message and actually changed or altered the direction of the message to cause it to become more about the Shabbat. Well, as time has progressed on, then there has been a third message that basically kind of established the cyclical nature of Isaiah 45:7. And then finally, last week, we discussed ceremony. What's interesting about this week is that I have a confirmed message. Now, let me describe for a moment what that means. That means that somewhere along the way, I'm going through the week and I will hear a question, or I will ask a question, or a question will be posed to me in the Na'um, and I will go, Lord, you know, right? That's kind of how the prophets responded. And I would say, look, I don't know. I don't know the answer to this. And then somebody would be like, hey, what do you think about this? And I'll know that's the confirmation for the message. So I have a confirmed message. Here's the interesting part. I can't remember it. So today is going to be very interesting, because normally when I don't have a confirmed message, I know that that Sabbath is going to be one of those Sabbaths that I take off from the broadcast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the recap. And I'm not starting with the recap because I don't know what to do. I'm starting with the recap because that's what I was told to do. And I know that probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense to people who don't understand how I do things. But for those of you who do, you know I'm right on track. So having said that, I'm following my nose, and let's start at the very beginning. Okay, let's go to the board and let's talk a little bit about perspective. Okay, so getting on our board, I think I definitely want my finger to be green. I want my fat pin to be that color, and I want my thin pin to be, yeah, blue. Sounds good. Actually, no, let's do yellow. All right, so getting started, we'll start with this simple word here. Okay. This is the Hebrew word. I'll even put the Nicodim in there for you guys. This is the Hebrew word interpreted in English as light. Let there be light is the first usage. Light. Okay. However, its actual meaning is derived from the idea of order. So the ideograph itself has the concept. However, the pictograph, on the other hand, which we're going to pictograph, is actually an ox's head, right? Everybody knows it. An ox's head and a human head. And the reason why we're dropping the Vav at this point, no. So, uh, check, check, check. Okay, I think we got it. All right. So anyways, so we have the ox's head, which means strong. And the idea behind it was the ox was the strongest animal for bearing a burden in the ancient Hebrews. And finally, we have the human head. Check, 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 check. Okay. So we're having a problem with the body pack mic. We'll definitely be editing that out, but we're going to see if we can proceed forward. If not, we'll have to switch over to the camera microphone. That'll take a minute. I promise you, we're not shutting down this one. This is an important message. Okay, so getting back to our concept here, let's talk a minute about Christianity. How many people who are Christians say that they are metaphorical Christians? A lot of people say, no, I'm a literal Christian. I am a Christian. Okay. But the truth is the reason why you're a Christian is because you believe you are one. So Christianity is a cognitive process. What does that mean? That means it's happening up here. Your whole process of your idea of being a Christian is up here. Okay. So because of that fact, then what we need to do is we need to get rid of the literal interpretation of this pictograph and go ahead and overlay it with a Christian version of this pictograph, which is going to obviously be mind, not head, not chief, not top, okay? And the reason why that is the case is because what we're working with here is a concept of belief, right? Belief. Okay. So getting back to our board. So we have the strong mind, right? We have the strong mind, and that concept is what is perceived as light in the English version of the Bible. In other words, there is an underlying concrete concept of order, of laying things in a sequence. That's the pictographic or the nomadic meaning. But the pictographic meaning, when you look into the lexicon, let's go do that real quick. Let's go look at the lexicon, and we will just look up the word or, and I will go ahead and use my why isn't this working? Okay, there we go. Everything's running really slow today. That's weird. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and use my Hebrew letter search, and we will just go with Aleph, Vav, Resh, and go get our word. Instead of going through the Strong's Concordance and all that other mess. We'll go straight to it. Okay, now, there's a couple of things that are, oh, you know what? That's in the preface. I need to make sure it's actually in the chapter. There we go. Okay, so then going back to our original parent root. See this right here. Pictograph. Make it orange. Pictograph, not known. Abstract, not known. Concrete, box. Okay, it's a box. It's a box to what? Store things in after if you've what? Gathered them. Okay. And so the idea, the concept of order is based upon that thought process, putting something in order. However, the pictograph itself is this, a strong mind, not strong chief, right? Not strong leader, none of that. It is a strong mind. Where's my proof? In this word. Recall that this word, ra, means evil, right? It's that premise of malevolence. Okay? That's the concept here. But looking into the ancient pictographic Hebrew, we have something else going on. And by the way, this can also appear to be a calamity, which is a very inappropriate interpretation of this word. This letter, the Ga, has to do with darkness. It has to do with the word evening. It has to do with the word goat hair, because of the darkness that goat hair causes a tent to become dark. If you don't have light inside the tent, you cannot see. That's how dark goat hair makes it. Add porpoise skins and ram skins, and we got a whole nother level of something going on. But the premise is darkness, but not darkness as in what you see when you see the word darkness in English, because that is the word choshech, which is a very different word. But here's the premise. Remember, we're recapping here. And one of the things that we invariably need to do is we need to assign value to things. So in this case, we've got what? We've got the resh again. Again, no resemblance to anybody you know. Okay? And what? We have the ayin, which if you've been listening to my stuff for very long, you know that that is not the ayin that has the eyeball, because that would be watcher of man, which would be what? It would be it would be an eye like this, right? But it's not. What is it? It is the twisted rope. Twisted rope. Always 3 twists, by the way, or always 2 twists, I guess you would call it. But the premise is that combined together is what? A weak mind. Why? Because a mind that is twisted does not perceive reality correctly, and therefore, as an observer of existence, does not perceive existence correctly, which is why Yahweh had to tell Adam not to eat from the tree. You see, the important little secret to that mystery, there was only one tree in the garden. When you look into the book of Revelation, chapter 22, you find a garden. You find the tree of life in that garden, but not the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The reason for that is because the tree of knowledge of good and evil was in the midst of the garden. And what tree was in the midst of the garden? The tree of life. They were one in the same tree. Adam viewed that tree or perceived that tree differently than how it was originally communicated to the garden to be. In other words, Adam altered that reality. Now, you can go into all kinds of changes on why that's true or not true, and I'm sure there's people who are going to try to prove to me that there was 2 trees in there, but there was not. Because why? Because number one, the tree which is in the midst of the garden, the tree that is the knowledge of good and evil, was also what tree was also in the midst of the garden was, and that's that word bethok, that's a very important Hebrew word, was the tree of life. And I think there's a very, very important point that needs to be made here, and that is there's a concept that there's 2 gardens as well. There's a garden east of Eden, and there's a garden in Eden. And we should talk about that sometime, but it's very important for you to know that the concept of the strong mind versus the weak mind has everything to do with perception. Okay? And that's going to be very important later on. However, I think there is a concept that also needs to be remembered from our year-long teaching on a strong mind versus a not strong mind, and that is when we were in Vayira last year, which is, and he appeared, which was what? It was the when he appeared to Adam in Genesis chapter 18, right? When we were in that Torah portion last year, we realized that even though the ancient pictographic Hebrew does not appear to mean light, but instead a strong mind, and that the opposite of light is not necessarily darkness, but the opposite of light is a weak mind or evil, right? But the premise is, I mean, even John, 1 John, talks about the children of the light versus the children of darkness, et cetera, et cetera. The Dead Sea Scrolls, the War Scroll, I believe it is, talks about the children of light versus the children of darkness, right? I think there might even be something in Enoch, but we'll go ahead and leave that alone. But the premise is that basically what we're working with is an idea that there are people who have a strong mind and people who have a weak mind. We know that that weak mind is connected to the wounds that they have received. That's why it says from childhood, every imagination of man is evil and violence. And that word evil is actually a weak mind. And that word violence has to do with the idea of taking hold of a sword and drawing it out of a sheath. Hamas is the Hebrew word, Hamas. And the premise is that it has to do with the idea of 5. Chamesh is the word for 5, Chamesh. And so basically the premise is that 5 fingers take hold of the hilt of a sword and handle of a sword and draw it out of its sheath, preparing for war. So every imagination of man's heart is the limited perception of the limiting beliefs, or the weak perception of reality, or the not so correct perception of reality. And the imagination of violence is not the idea of conjuring up violence, but instead preparing in fear, or preparation as a result of fear. We'll get into that in the Renewing Your Mind series. However, what's imperative for you to understand is we're not dealing with compare contrast here. There isn't a black and white. There's a magnitude and flow of light. Now, the best way to illustrate this would be to think of it more of a continuum instead of a balance. Okay, so let's talk about balance. Good, evil, right? This is our brain on Christianity, right? Good, evil, good, evil, good, evil. But the truth is that instead there's a flow that's a result of what? An emanation. My proof in that is going to come from Isaiah 45:7. I am preparing, no, I am forming light. I am forming the strong mind. I am fattening or intensifying darkness. I am intensifying a weak mind. Why? Because that's when there's a possession and then a crying out. We talked about it in the cycles of Israel. Remember, he sold them, he intensified the evil. They had originally been tempted by Midian, had gone after other gods, and then what? Midian begins to oppress them and then takes possession of them completely. And it says he sold them without a price. He sold them for cheap, right? And then all of a sudden they cry out, and then he uses the Yeshua principle, which is a self-delivery, where he raises up a judge, and then they take an army and go and deliver the nation of Israel from the Midianites. And so the cycle of Israel processes as a death, burial, and resurrection, a death, burial, and resurrection. But the premise is in that death, burial, and resurrection, winter, spring, summer, fall, winter, spring, summer, fall, all of that is in connection to the idea of a flow and not a balance. Don't get me wrong. One of the persistent elements that is not recognized very well by Christianity is the balance of good and evil. We'll work with that more later, but the premise is or maybe not today. The premise is that basically what we have going on is that if you have a light, let there be light, that light is actually present as a strong mind. Now, there's a couple things that are very important. The first one is that this is an imperative and it is a command, but it is not completed. Okay, and I'll explain that here in the grammar in a minute. But what I really want to work on is the premise of what light is in terms of the Hebraic mystical understanding, which is literally a mind that is not swayed by the manipulations of the weak mind. We'll get to that. Okay, so conceptually, we still have this concept of light, and I'm going to explain that in a minute. Now, when I said we need to recap, there's a reason for this. Let me show you. So first of all, it's important that you understand. Let's just do a quick Aleph Beit real quick here. Aleph Beit, Gamal, Dalet, He, Vav, right? That's probably enough. So you see there's a sequence moving this direction, okay? Progressing. All right. So since it's moving, let's do that. Let's do this one in this color right here. So there's the progression. There's the movement. The rightmost letter gets the absolute double portion inheritance, firstborn treatment and therefore receives preference over the second letter in a parent root. What makes that important is that means that this one augments this one. The tent is made strong by the aleph, not the aleph by the bait. Okay? And so if these were swapped, then this would mean tent of strength, or a tent that makes something strong, versus the tent being made strong by something. What that means is that we need more information. What causes the of or the father to be strong, right? It's the aleph. The aleph causes the father to be strong. Now, I'm not going to get too much into this, but the premise is that the sequencing of letters is very important. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this. And what we're going to do here is we have the aleph resh for light. We have the resh aleph for see. How does sight occur? Sight occurs through what? Light. The only way that you see anything with your eyeballs is a result of a process of interpreting light. Light reflected off of materials gives them their color, unless it's black, which absorbs all of the light, and that's why we see it as black. And notice that black has an absolute to it, but black also, because there's no darker shade of black, right? Black is black. So when you have a brown and you add some more absorption of light, you get black. But there is nothing further beyond black. The reason that's important is because we know that black is akin to that twisted rope, akin to the black hair of the goat, akin to the evening turning into twilight, etc., etc. Attributing that blackness, not necessarily darkness, to that thought process. But the part that's very important here is where the letters are located. Okay, so we have on this side the letter aleph being on the right-hand side and therefore augmenting. In other words, something is causing the mind to be strong, right? But then in sight, we are causing the mind is causing something to be strong. And so the concept or the idea of this permutation right here, which is the only permutation, by the way, of light. So sight is the only permutation of light. What do I mean permutation? Well, let me show you. So let's say that we use the word kill, right? Wrote that a little bit backwards. Let's do it this way. Here we go. Okay, katal. A permutation of katal is lamed, kaf, tet, right? Another permutation could be tet, kaf, lamed, right? And so the whole idea is that you can come up with these permutations and they will have more meanings that are connected with the word. I've never met another language that can do that except for ancient Semitic. Okay, so because of that fact, and if you want to look into that some more, Rabbi Hirsch has an amazing book that has to do with the etymology of Hebrew. But anyways, in this case, there's only one permutation, and it's to see. Well, it's intriguing. There's a lot that goes into this, but this is intriguing. If we were just to look at this from an existential point of view, one of the things that we would encounter is the idea that light is pre-existent, but a strong mind is pre-existent, but to be able to see is a requirement of a strong mind. In other words, The premise is that if you can see, it's because you are able to perceive the light. So here's the intrigue. If the strong mind is pre-existent and the seeing mind is an effort of the strong mind, then now we can see where an Elohim exercises its power in the power of observance. Now, we could get into all kinds of things about this, couldn't we? But the premise is that this is a recap in order to prepare you for the rest of the message today. Because there's a number of things that we needed to get straight. The first had to do with the location of the letter and what its preeminence has. For example, the fact that the mind alters the rope in the word evil. Very important, right? Because that means that what? The mind is observing reality incorrectly. The mind is twisting it. So the word evil itself has to do with what? A manipulation here done by the observer. We'll get to that. Okay, maybe not today, but now the reason why that's important is because now one of the things we find out is instead of this original sin crap that Augustine came up with, that there were a few minor, like Justin Martyr, I think, spoke about it a little bit, but there's a few minor church fathers who got into it. But Augustine just put it out on Front Street. Oh, you're just evil. You're all evil. And there's nothing you can do about it. That's the total depravement, right? The total depravity. Point being is I just countered that and said, no, the strong mind is pre-existent. Then we need to understand better what that means for the sake of humanity. Because I can tell you, if we're dealing with a God who spends his time getting mad at things that are weaker than him, we have a problem, right? And if he gets mad enough to hurt them for the rest of eternity because they screw something up in their finite 75-year to 85-year lifespan, we have a problem. You know, and a member of After's Heart Ministry is probably not going to serve that God, right? But here's the part that's important. Don't think that that changes the level of disconnect and other things that occur as a result of that, because remember, this thing is about intimacy. It's about marriage. It's about consummation. Right? We have a bride at the end of time. In Revelation chapter 19. How many more chapters are there? 20, 21, 22. Done. Okay, so that being the case, Revelation chapter 19, verses 7 and 8. Bride has made herself ready, right? Has made herself ready. The Resh is in front in that process. It's a choice. It's a choice. But there's a preeminence that occurs, and that's important. Okay, the reason why we need to kind of get on that idea is because we need to operate off of the idea that a weak mind actually is something that augmented the strong mind that was pre-existent. In other words, you were born with a strong mind. You were born a full-blown Elohim. How do we know that? Because the same brain tissue that existed on the day you were born is the same brain tissue you have when you die, unless it's deteriorated as a result of Alzheimer's or some other thing. But even then, there's brain elasticity. We've seen people bounce back from those diseases. Here's my point. My point is that we are working with perfection as the default, not the thing that we hope to attain. Now, somebody might come along in Philippians and say, wait a minute, Paul said he hasn't attained. What didn't he attain to? He explains what he didn't attain to. He explains, I want to attain to what? The resurrection power. I want to be able to resurrect myself, right? That was the premise. I want to be able to resurrect myself. And I want to know that suffering. I want to know Christ's suffering so that I can know that power. It sounds prideful. If you just hear him say it, it sounds prideful. But the truth is he was attaining to the upper worlds. Okay, so now that we've done that recap and we understand now the preeminence of letter or the predominance of letters and where they're located and the significance of that, and we understand that if we get into the ancient Hebrew lexicon of the Bible and we see a pictograph with a question mark next to it, then we invariably know that there's what? A problem in interpreting it. In other words, look at the definition here. Boxes are used to store items and keep them in order. Light is also necessary for order, although he doesn't explain why, right? And we get into light, we get into bringer of one who carries light into darkness, which is the Aharon, which is basically Aaron's name. And then what? To place in a box or pen, right? To collect, right? And so we're working with this idea of order, not photons, right? Okay, fine. Not photons, not anything to do that. How do we know? Because until we get to the fourth day, we have a problem. We have no way to define morning and evening, and yet there was a morning and evening. We have no way to define a day, and yet there was supposedly a day. Although if you interpret it correctly, according to the ancient pictographic Hebrew, is a work in chaos, right? If you look at these things in their correct pictographic definitions, the texts change. And what you're going to find is that you actually are a definition of land. You are aretz. You're going to find that you have a emanation of darkness, and or I should say a manifestation of darkness. You will also find that there is a preeminence of an abyss. That has a lot of intrigue that you won't understand if you're just reading it in the English. Okay, I feel like that might kind of sound condescending, but it's not. I promise you, the journey that I'm trying to bring you on is one where you become my replacement, where you become so proficient at this understanding that I can retire. Okay. But until then, I have to explain these things. And I promise you, I'm not being arrogant. I'm training my replacements. Okay. And so the part that you need to really, really latch on to is the superiority of the preeminent strong mind. Here's why. Yeshua's at Hanukkah. He's talking to the Jews. They get kind of weird on him and ask him a question. He turns around and says something about being I am, and they take up stones to kill him. They take up stones to kill him, and he says, hey, what work have I done? What thing have I done wrong that you would throw stones at me? And they said, it's not your works, it's your mouth. And what you said was you were equal with God. And he says, the scriptures can't be broken. What does that mean? That means that Psalms has the eminence of Torah. We'll get into that sometime. But the idea is that Psalms is an agent of Torah, or one who has authority as a result of Torah. Okay? And he says the scriptures, the graphe, cannot be broken. For it is written in some place, you are all gods. Now, there are those who come along. NASB calls it judges. Michael, I can't remember his last name, calls it the council, right? The divine council. There's others who have come along and said that it was, angels who they were talking about. But Yeshua is being argued with whether he considers himself equal with God or not. And his response is, you are all that way. So we need to change our thinking. We need to alter that. Now, does that mean that we are some Zeus walking around, or we're going to end up like Thor with the hammer? No, this is something different. And a lack of understanding is going to expose it to that bias that makes Christians so undesirable to be around. Okay? But the concept or the idea is that then results in us needing to think about this. We have a preeminent strong mind. That preeminent strong mind will in turn offer the power to the observer to have authority. Resh Aleph, mind authority, mind strong, not strong mind, right? To see, Resh Aleph, is to observe with authority. Doesn't this sound familiar? Does this sound like quantum mechanics where they still cannot figure out why even the particle detector itself, because it is made of particles, forces the particle to spin at the direction that it does, and then the quantum tunneling connects that thing to the other one through at the speed of thought, because there's nothing faster than the quantum communication between the two as to what's spinning which direction? What's going on here? Why does the ancient pictographic Hebrew talk about quantum mechanics? I don't know. Why does the ancient pictographic Hebrew talk about tritium and deuterium in the sky condensing and becoming the sun, the Koth? I'll tell you why. Because there was a divineness to those people, a divine oneness that they had. When inappropriately used, was confounding their languages. But when they had it and they used it appropriately, it was not only blessed, prospered, and made elite to every nation around it, but it became the sole target of malevolence. In other words, there was no greater concentration of trying to destroy it, bring it down, or remove it than if it had the name Israel on it, or better yet, the word Hebrew on it. Remember, Abraham was a Hebrew. In chapter 14, verse 15 of Genesis, we see Lot get taken, and the servant of Lot returns to Abraham the Hebrew. Well, let me tell you something. Hebrews became Israelites. Israelites got exiled, but there was one tribe left who was what? Judah. And of course, Benjamin had been absorbed into Judah because of the split between the kingdoms and the geographical location of Benjamin. And then, of course, the exiled priests from the northern kingdom, Levi. So Judah, Benjamin, and half the tribe of Levi becomes what? The Yehudim, as they go into Babylon, goes into becoming Yehus when we go into Persia. And next thing you know, we're in Greece as Udias, right? Jews. And so what you need to understand is from the beginning of time, there has been an intention to remove the strong mind preeminence and infect it with the what? With the malevolence. And that unfortunately is occurring as a result of the sovereignty of free will and the sovereignty of the fact that you are an Elohim. You have absolute sovereign authority within the confines of the world in which you were given jurisdiction, which is very, very important when we get to how the universe responds to a human being. Because remember, the universe is conspiring. The whole universe, all of the reality of height, width, depth, time, and all of its constituent spiritual connections is conspiring on your behalf, you, son of Adam, to what? To be absolutely, not conditionally obedient to the sons of Adam, regardless of whether it is right or wrong. If you desire it, the universe is going to respond and grant you it because you are a king. You are a sovereign. You are an Elohim. And that's the problem that we have with Augustine's hogwash about original sin. Now, the preeminence of this or begs the question, where did it come from? This is clear. This is something that becomes. This is something made out of something. The mind begins to alter something, right? But where does the other part come from? And what is the significance of this in that process? What's the significance of the twisted mind in that process? Light, see, evil, right? Because we still have the mind in there. And don't get me started with for example, the word Rapha, which is the resh pei. The mind and the mouth is the word for healing. Don't even get me started. Now, here's the part that's so important. What we have here is the concept of emanation versus manifestation. We have the idea of intention versus reality, okay? So what we're going to have to do is work through this concept of free will on that level, because then we get into the focus or the premise of the idea of cycles, okay? So the next thing that we need to really look at here is, how is there a preeminent strong mind? How is it pre-existent to the reality of existent? So let's go to the board and we will talk about that, okay? All right, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to talk about contraction. And the idea behind contraction is a squeezing or a reducing in size, okay? And in this case, it's going to be a reducing in magnitude. So let's say that we have this entire mess here, which we will call infinite light, okay? So what do we know? Undefined. Okay, undefined. What else? Unlimited. Don't know how we got a square root in there, whatever that is. Let's get rid of that. Unlimited. Okay. So undefined and unlimited. What's the importance there? That there's nothing that can stop it, and there's nothing that actually tells us what it is. We just know that it exists. Why do we call it light? Because the focus or the concept is the idea of energy. And even the smallest burst of energy contains some sort of information that would tell that energy that it encounters something, tells it a story, as it were. And so light is information. So now what happens is there is some sort, okay, I'm just going to put some rays here, right? And so then there is some sort, let's use a different pen, of thing, okay? I'm going to go ahead and use a cube just because it creates a good definition of what we got going on. And then what do we have? We have this concept or this idea of a shadow, right? I know it's probably dumb to use light as a shadow. In fact, what we should do is probably use negative space to describe it. And so we have this idea of a shadow, and we have light passing, we have light passing all around it, except in that one spot. And that one spot is a shadow. Okay, so I'm just going to draw a little leader line here, and let's use a different color. Draw a little leader line here coming out from it, and then we can invariably define its existence. This is shadow, okay? Shadow. In the Hebrew, this is Selem. In the English, this is image. In other words, we are the shadow made by the thing that blocks the infinite, undefined, unlimited light. In other words, we are the first definition Now, you can't think of shadow as evil. You can't think of shadow as darkness, as death, or any of those other things. You need to think of shadow as proof that something blocked light, right? If you have a shadow, that means there's light shining on you, and you can see a silhouette of yourself. But here's the intrigue. That silhouette is a facsimile of what that real thing, what that blocking thing is, not what the light is. And we know that the intensification of all power in the universe is the light. So the thing that blocks the light has a purpose that is very powerful because it's what makes you who you are. Okay. Remember, undefined, unlimited until we have the blocking, until we have the thing. So what is this blocker? This is free will. Free will. Now, what we do, what us humans do, is we believe that we need to give glory to the definer. We need to give glory to the information because we believe that that is what it wants. But what you need to understand, and this is, I tell you what I'm going to do here. I'm going to get pretty blatant with this. Let's turn this up just a smidge. Put this board back on. One way. The intensification of all power in the universe is not a vacuum. The intensification of all power in the universe is not a receiver. The intensification of all power in the universe does not have a void or deficit within itself beyond the you. And we'll get to that in a minute. But the premise is if it's flowing one direction, then that means you need to recalibrate on what you can do to it and why your mind thinks that it can do something for it. Because it will come back to the idea that you believe that you can put something in that, but you can't. You cannot. So now we get into glory. We get into worship. We get into, for example, in the Jewish prayers, we say, Baruch atah Adonai, blessed are you, Lord God. Why do we say that? Can you possibly pronounce a blessing upon the intensification of all power in the universe? No, you cannot. So what do we do that? What is the concept there? And what is the refocus that we need to have? The refocus that we need to have is that we can never, ever do anything to it except allow it to do what it does. And this is the part that's important. It does not want to receive. It wants to give. And the only way in which you can give anything to it is to satisfy its desire to what? To create an inception, to begin something. Paul says, if any man be in Christ, we'll talk about that in a minute. If any man be in Christ, then behold, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away. All things have become new. That's an inception. And that's an intercourse. And that is a relationship that did not exist beforehand. So we have a very legitimate concept in Christianity of having a relationship with God. It's just we're very convoluted on what we're supposed to be doing. We're the female. And it's very, very important that you understand that. You are not the masculine principle of God. As an image of God, you are an Elohim, which makes you female. And I'll explain in a minute why I'm saying you are an Elohim and that makes you female. Because, of course, we do have Yahweh Elohim being described as masculine. There's a reason for that. We'll get into that. And the biggest reason is because the Yahweh is actually the merciful, to a fault, chesed of God, right? The Racham, the filter of all information that is going up towards the intensification of all power in the universe is going through the filter of mercy first. But that's another story, right? What we need to work with here is this idea of this tselem, okay, of this image of God. We need to talk a minute about what is this blocker? What does it do? What does it create? It creates the answer to a question, and that question is, may I proceed without limitation? So the intensification of all power in the universe is throwing all this light down upon everything. And I shouldn't say down upon because it's going out in every direction. There's no actual geographical and or Cartesian location that you could actually say that it's going in. Okay. There is a concept of vector, but that's a very different principle. Now, having said that, all this light is going out in all directions and is showering everywhere without any limitation. What does that mean? There's no stopping it. And it's undefined. We don't know what it is, but we do know that it is present. Okay. And as it's going out whoosh, in all directions, that is an emanation. Something is emanating from the core of that intensification of all power in the universe, which is not a physics, astrophysical, pre-existent primordial substance, but is a ever eternal consciousness. And that ever eternal consciousness has these thoughts about what it wishes that it could do. And then that all of a sudden becomes the thing, because the moment that it thinks something, that happens. Well, that's interesting, because that sounds a little bit like the dominion of man on earth. Okay, so the next thing that happens is the intensification of all power in the universe says, I need something to choose me, right? To choose to receive from me. I dump this out upon everything that is around me, which is nothing, and nothing happens. I need something to make the choice to desire me, right? Okay, so then what does that mean? We have the negation particle. Remember, this is a recap. We have the negation particle. What does the negation particle do? It reverses the imperative. It reverses the instruction. For example, it says, you shall murder not. You shall steal not. So he creates this not, right? This negation particle. What does the negation particle do? It says, no, you may not be undefined. No, you may not be unlimited. Meaning what? You need definition, right? So he creates this negation particle, and the fallout from it is a vessel of reception that could never become the light that he is. So it will always be dependent upon him to receive. But that vessel of reception has absolute sovereignty that contains the same information as the intensification of all power in the universe. This is the concept of emanation becoming manifestation. So the premise is that some force of some sort comes along with an intention of wanting something. The contraction occurs, and the result is a manifestation. In other words, this is how that light was interpreted. The information was interpreted, and this is what that thing became, the bride. And what's important about this is how that becomes defined in the nation of Israel, how that comes defined in the believer in Yeshua HaMashiach, how that becomes defined in what was lost from the pagan infiltrations of the way, or what we call today Christianity. All Christianity is a pagan infiltration of the way. So we need to understand better what the way was, and we need to understand better what the way was practicing. And unfortunately, what we currently have does not help us much, right? We have these documents that we can't validate, and we have these testimonies that we can't validate that seem to indicate that all of a sudden God went pagan on us. Now, it is very, very important to understand that there is an intimate intercourse, equality relationship with the intensification of all power in the universe. This particular lady right here happens to be very interconnected with this particular entity. Okay. Now, we could call it submission, but that would be inappropriate because there's more equality there than people would like to admit. Okay. Especially womanizers and, misogynists. And not only is there an equality there, but the actual name of Yahweh cannot be completed without both the masculine and feminine principles. We don't need to get into that today. But as you can see, it's a one-way trip, which means the bride has a very specific function and a very specific way in which she is supposed to exist. Why is that so important? Because when we get into Adam and the sons of Adam, we have a very intriguing thing happening, don't we? We have the intensification of all power in the universe starting to have limitation and therefore existence. And let me explain to you how. That's one thing that might be important and we need to discuss. The thing that we need to discuss is this particular deal here. This particular deal here is what? A feminine principle. Okay, totally butchered that word. A feminine principle. Okay, a feminine principle, which means what? Definition just occurred. How? Whatever's left over from this information is masculine. Meaning what? This is the definition of the masculine and feminine principle as a result of free will. The negation particle creates free will. The free will creates a binary, God forbid, a binary masculine and feminine principle. Now, does that mean male and female? Is that the Zakar and the Nekeva? No, 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 no. Not quite. Not quite yet. Because there's more definitions that need to occur. But what is known is the masculine principle. And you know what? So much so, I'm actually going to correct this a little bit. Okay? I'm actually going to come in here with a very, very different, existence. Okay? This is feminine. There we go. This is masculine. And so as a result of that, and let me just go ahead and color my pen one more time here. As a result of that, all of this is one way. The only way to do anything for the masculine, that's great, masculine principle is to receive. Okay, to receive. And that is the principle that's what we're working with here is the free will says, nope, I won't receive. Nope, I don't. I just say no. Just say no. No. And that creates a moment in which the intensification of all power in the universe is no longer the intensification of all power in the universe because it just got limited. Now, does that cause the intensification of all power in the universe that was the primordial moment of reality to cease to exist? No. The information being passed down from the intensification of all power in the universe through the negation particle is light. And the information being passed down says, you exist to defy me. Okay? Because I need something to choose me. I want you first to not just freely accept from me. You need to investigate and learn and understand that I'm the only thing that you really want. And not only that, but what I have is what you really need. That's the premise there. Okay. Now, sounds kind of arrogant, sounds kind of whatever. And that's where we get into sovereignty. Like, who cares? Nobody asked you, right? Nobody asked the first Elohim if it wanted to be an Elohim, but it became one. And once it did, it said no, which was powerful. It just turned away the entire existence of reality. Nope, I don't want it. Lady's got a lot of power, right? So then the premise is, nope, you can't come in. You can't come in. And then what? A realization that nothing else exists that could satisfy the desire and hunger for that moment of intimacy, of intercourse. And then once that moment of desire is met, it is limited. So not only do we have definition, oh, you're masculine, but only what I allow, right? So we go from nope to only what I allow. Remember, this is a recap on our teaching about the three principles, three primordial principles of no, only what I allow, reception resulting as in an inception results in a conception, which results in a very new thing. Okay. Okay, so one of the things then that we need to understand is that at the core of the reality of existence is free will. Well, here we go with another one of those things that Augustine was absolutely obsessed with, and that was the idea of unlimited, or I'm sorry, unconditional election. That the intensification of all power in the universe, Yahweh, God of the Old Testament, who knows what we're going to call it for Augustine's sake, says, I'm going to create those who are going to be destroyed in the hellfire and destruction and those who are going to go to heaven. No, again, I'm not serving that kind of God. I'm not. Sorry, I'm just not. And as far as I know, all the constituents of After His Heart Ministries are also very much convinced of that fact. Sorry, that's the creator. Destroy me then, because honestly, there's no reason. There's no reason for it. The intensification of all power in the universe has everything it needs. It has no deficits by which it should get its feelings hurt if you decide to tell a rock that that's what created you, and then it's going to punish you for the rest of eternity. Hogwash. Augustine was off his rocker. He'd probably read the Nag Hammadi without any understanding of Torah. All right, so the concept here is that now what we have is we have this premise of interconnectedness or equality, an equality between the two, right? But she brings something to the table, doesn't she? She shuts down the chaos. No, I'm not supposed to have that word on my lips, but can you think of a better word to describe that madness, right? An unlimited, undefined assertion of power. Does not sound like the creator God I grew up with. Sounds like somebody who doesn't take no for an answer. But he takes and he creates something. He creates a no, and the result of the no is a feminine principle. And the feminine principle then defines him as masculine. So we go from it to him, and that never changes. We worship a him. We bow to a him. We give glory to a him. He is the existence. I mean, Yeshua is a masculine, a manifestation of an emanation of the masculine principle, as am I. But corporately, I'm not. Corporately, I am this. If I'm in the image of God, I'm female. And if I'm female, then I need to cosmically receive my husband's assertion as a husband and allow inception, reception, and conception to occur. But you need to understand that doesn't occur on the individual level. The akkad is powerful. And that's actually where we're going to get into the concept of our message today. We're going to get into that principle. So, let's see how I want to do this. I think the first thing that I need to do is go ahead and pull up Echad, Genesis chapter 1. Okay. And specifically, actually, you know what? My mistake is Genesis chapter 2. And specifically, we're going to be looking at verse 24, I believe. Yeah, verse 24. And this is what it says. It says, Al Cain. In other words, upon this positive recognition, Azav Ish, right? Azav Ish shall leave or shall move away from, right? Shall move away from or shall draw away from it, which is what? The definite object marker. I'm sorry, definite direct object marker. The mother, okay? And I'll explain that in a minute. And the father, right? And Vedavach shall cleave, I'll explain that in a minute. Be'eshto, his female, and specifically I say his woman, vechayu, and they shall become. Remember that word chaya, or that word chava, which was the idea of observing the existence, and they shall observe the existence of what? Flesh, for the sake of flesh, echad, which is a word that you cannot say is the word one, but instead says, and they will be alone. Now, let me explain. Here, and I love just pulling stuff off my desk and using it. I really need some better objects from my object lessons. But here are 2 pins, okay? Now, no matter what I do, I cannot make this into 1 pin. These are my pins for my digital whiteboard, and they will never, ever be more than 1, okay? Or I'm sorry, there will always be more than 1. 2. Now, if I take a pin away, this pin is 1 pin, right? 1 and 2 is the cardinal numbering system to sequentially define one object from another. This is pin 1, this is pin 2, right? Okay. Pin number 1, however, by itself is echad, because it's alone. Echad means alone. Now, there's a bunch of ways we could define that, but the short version is that there is nothing that causes it to have any definition from any other thing. In other words, there's no relatable facsimile of existence. That's echad. In other words, the man and woman become so equal that they are not definably two. Okay, that's the difference between the English understanding of that word one flesh, which everybody just automatically equates to intercourse, right? But what you don't realize is that then there is a remez that occurs that is uber important. Okay, somebody out there just said, what the heck is a remez? Okay, let's talk about that for a minute real quick. I think that's a very important thing that we need to discuss. That is not the camera I want. Okay, here we go. Boy, there's a lot of stuff we're going to have to edit out of this one. Okay, so here we go. This is the simplicity of it. There's an idea that there is a literal context, and that is what you see is what you get, okay? But that literal context does not exist as a single a singularity. Now, this is the problem with Christianity. Christianity takes everything literally. We've got the Left Behind series defining things in the book of Revelation literally. Problem with that is that literal context is only one context. In fact, I'm going to move this dot. That literal context is only one context. The second context is what we call remez. Remez is powerful because it somehow connects itself to the future. Oh, by the way, this is Peshat. Now, if you really want to see this in operation, go read John chapter 6, where Yeshua uses these arguments in his midrash with the Jews. Okay, so the remez is another thing, and these are interconnected, interwoven, integrated. In other words, the literal cannot exist without the remez. Well, what's the remez? A thematic context. What do I mean by that? I mean, you can't get the full story from just one verse. You have to go to the other verses that talk about the same word or the same concept or the same thought process and find out the rest of the story, right? Okay. And then what we have is we have what's called the drash. Drash. Okay. And the drash is basically a concept. And notice that the drash is integrated into the remez. You can't have the remez without the drash, and you can't have the literal without the drash, and you can't have the drash without the literal, and you can't have the drash without the remez. They're all integrated. This is like some sort of symbiotic relationship. You cut one off, nothing exists. Okay? But in that process, then we have another thing. Okay, by the way, the drash, let's go with that first. So this concept is the idea of seeking. And really the way you want to do this is speculate. Now, let me tell you where this idea comes from. This idea comes from the concept that, number one, you are an Elohim, but also that you are perfect, and also that you actually have within you the information that you need to know about the intensification of all power in the universe in order to functionally operate within his system. Now, what's imperative about this is to understand that the difference between the infinite nothingness and then light, and then a masculine and feminine principle as a result of a negation particle, is that it is also interconnected with this. Okay, so there's obviously, those of you who know this, there's actually one more, and there's actually a fifth one I'm not going to reveal to you today. But the premise is that basically what we have going on is we have this idea that these are interconnected with the soul of Torah. In other words, Torah, as a human being, Yeshua HaMashiach, has these 5 worlds present within him that operate as an understanding of what he truly is, okay, and what he's trying to exemplify for us while here. Torah got fed up with us interpreting it correctly and manifested as the intensification of all power in the universe stuffed into a human being. Now, can we define him as divine? Absolutely, we can, because we are. Can we define him as sinless? Absolutely we can, because we're supposed to be, right? He just made a choice. He just made a decision. Nothing gave him extra power to be obedient. It is very imperative that you understand that he cannot take your sin unless he was able to overcome it. That's very important. Imputation is based upon an absolute righteousness, right? Versus a not so righteousness, and then them switching positions. He was in all ways tempted, but did not sin. Sin is a transgression of Torah. Therefore, he kept Torah perfectly, and he exemplified how. He got rid of the traditions of men that didn't make sense. He kept the traditions of men that did. And then in addition to that, added some traditions of men to it. That's right. He had his own Talmud. Okay. So the premise is in all of that, what we have is we have this focus of a symbiotic relationship between the literal, the thematic, and the speculative. Now, there is a concept in systematic theology. It's probably going to be third or fourth year systematic theology, which has the idea that if there is a discussion about God, it is proof that God exists. Now, that's an existential theology, right? That's the idea that if we think about him, therefore he must be, right? Well, in Judaism, and specifically in the yeshiva, there is a concept very similar that says that if you speculate that it is in Torah, it is. Now, I know that sounds off the wall, and you could probably really abuse that concept. But the premise is that we will sit in a midrash and we will speculate about things, and we will argue about things and try to say that it's real or not real, and we'll try to prove it and review it de novo, etc., trying to what? To gain a deeper understanding, seeking. Where do we see that? We see that when Yeshua walks into the synagogue. They hand him the Isaiah scroll, which has been rolled according to the schedule that Ezra made to the spot that it is supposed to be for that day, for that reading, which means we could technically find out when it was that Yeshua actually went into the synagogue and did this. But then he opens it up. He reads it. He closes it. He sits down. Everybody stands up. That's how a midrash is supposed to go. I won't make you guys do that in After His Heart. But the concept is that he sits down, and that means everybody needs to give him attention. And he says, this day, these words are fulfilled in your eyes, in your sight. Everybody starts going at it. Can it be this? Can it be this? Can it be this? They're all speculating. Why could he say that? How could that mean that? What does that mean? How could he say those words? They don't make sense. Drosh. Drosh. And when you put an M next to it, it is the ing. Midrash is the seeking. When you are in an active state of seeking, you are in a midrash. So midrash is an argument or a debate or a connective discussion between one extreme or another, etc., not necessarily contradictory, as you'll see in the Genesis and the Image of God series between Deborah and I, but also the premise or the idea that there is another thought here. It's open-mindedness. Okay. Now, I know I'm taking a long time with this this explanation of the literal, the thematic, and the speculative, which we'll also call the allegorical. We attach metaphor to literal words. Because why? Because Hebrew is an idiomatic language. A rock doesn't mean a rock. It doesn't matter if you pick it up. It's still not a rock. It's philosophically that thing. We can see that true in the proof of the word unclean, where we have a pictographic drawing of a container of water. Is that unclean? No, that's the solution for being dirty, right? That's the premise there. I could go on and on with different ones that describe that. Okay? All right. So in that whole focus then, now what we need to do is we need to look at one more point on here to make all of our connections. But when we do, then we will also better understand something further. Okay. So first of all, I think it's important for everyone to understand that when we're doing this, there's one more point. And I won't talk about the fifth point at this point, but this is called the sod or hidden. Okay. And this is dependent upon this, and this is dependent upon this, and this is dependent upon this. These are symbiotic. They do not operate outside of each other. You don't just go into Torah and literally interpret it and you're done. You need to know the remez, you need to know the drash, and you need to know the sod. And I'm going to tell you right now, the sod does not come without the Ruach HaKodesh. The sod does not come without the Spirit of the living God within you. The sealing of the new covenant is the Ruach HaKodesh, right? So, of course, for those of you who study Mezilat Yesharim, right? You rabbis who study Mezilat Yesharim, or the way of the righteous, know that the Ruach HaKodesh doesn't come until there's a certain amount of humility involved. Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and he will raise you up into a position of honor. That's James chapter 4 for those of you who don't read the New Testament. So now, what's important about this is the concept that this is a life changer. It is always the final result of the verse to begin with. And here's the kicker. There are 70 facets of wisdom contained within Torah, which means there's 70 different interpretations of that sod, which means there's 70 different lifestyle changes that need to occur in you as a result of you studying one single verse. Remember, Yahweh had me in, the Father had me in Genesis chapter 1 for 10 years. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Never got out of it. And one day out of the middle of nowhere, I got some revelation on Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. And next thing you know, I was in Genesis chapter 1, verse 3 for 5 years. 15 years in the first 3 verses of Genesis chapter 1. So please understand, if you think you've got a verse figured out, you don't. And if you think that's the only interpretation, you have just doomed yourself to a weak mind. Promise you. Okay, so now you understand there are different levels of interpretation of contextual study of a verse. Okay, and we need to remez our verse. We need to remez the word echad. Well, one of the ways that we're going to do that is we're going to go, and by the way, I'm not going to go past remez with this in this actual teaching, but you can later on. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go to first usage, and that being Genesis 1:5. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was an evening and there was a morning of what? Day 1, a day that was alone from the rest. We won't even get into that today. So a day that was alone from the rest. But then we get into 1:9, let the waters below the heavens be gathered in one place and let the dry land appear. And it was so. Oh, that's interesting. So what is that? That's that one place. Okay. We could talk all about waters being echad, but we won't do that today, that the waters are alone. And then what? Then we have the first, or we have the one that's called the Pishon, which stands out from the rest and is alone. And then we start to get into chapter 2. So Yahweh caused a deep sleep to fall upon man, and he slept, and he took one rib, echad, of his ribs, closed up the flesh in that place. Okay, keep going. Genesis chapter 3, verse 22. Oh, goodness. Then Yahweh Elohim says, behold, the man has become like echad, one of us, knowing good and evil. I'm not even going to go there. Where we need to go is we need to go to Deuteronomy. You need to remember what I've taught you about Deuteronomy thus far. Okay? Let's talk about that for a moment. What was Deuteronomy? What is Deuteronomy? Deuteronomy is Moses' last declaration. I want you to think about it. For those of you who have children, those of you who have people who you care about, who are where you're the greater and they're the lesser. Okay? Maybe it's a wife, maybe it's grandchild, whatever. Maybe it's just a co-worker who you manage, and you know you're about to die soon. So now you're going to what? Give to that person your best version of don't do, don't make this mistake I made. Definitely invest in this. I mean, David did it with Solomon. He's like, look, do this, do this, do this, do this. Deal with these, right? You know you're going to die. It's time to make a discussion. Isaac blesses his son, etc., etc. So now here we go. Moses, in the middle of his sermon or his last declaration, says this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Now, this is what I want you to think about. Let's go back to this for a second. Oh, I'm in the wrong direction. Where is that? Oh, there it is. Okay. So here we are with this intensification of all power in the universe, one-way street, shooting all this stuff off in one direction. Negation particle occurs, and now next thing you know, we have a feminine principle, which is the bride. That bride then defines it as a him, right? And so that now becomes the definition of the intensification of all power in the universe. Within that focus, somewhere there's a concept of it observing the established existence. Remember the idea of the name Yahweh, right? It has its established existence. It observes the established existence and therefore becomes what? A creator, because a creator is someone who observes the existence of something as a result of a perception and a desire, or I'm sorry, expectation. Remember, expectation is the information that's communicated to the particle. Remember that information is light. Okay, we'll keep going. So the premises is now we got this concept going on here. And so now the name Yahweh manifests in the masculine principle a little bit further down the line, which we won't talk about today. But the concept is now we have Yahweh. Well, we have Yahweh as a result of all the defining now has become a part of the Elohim process, but is at the top of that hierarchy. Are we Elohim? Absolutely. Are we equal with him? Absolutely. But not in the sovereignty of his ability to just stop it, shut it all down, and everything just ceases to exist. Because why? Still the intensification of all power in the universe. Now let's get back to our verse. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Let's talk a minute about the Shema for just a quick moment. When a Jew knows they are going to die, they stand and face death without fear. And they pronounce the Shema as their last declaration. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Okay? The concept, though, is that this is a remez on the connection to the colloidal process of the masculine and feminine principle manifested as a man and a woman. They come together, they're Echad, but that also means that they are Yahweh Elohim. How is this possible? What is the concept here? Well, the idea is that Yeshua was trying to help us understand that we on a continuum are all part of the same system. We are manifestations at a certain level of interpretation of information, or just like the concept of the Hebrew learnings, we are at a certain level an interpretation of a very different information that's communicated from far, far superior in magnitude consciousness. Now, I know that that is really, really off the wall, and it kind of flies in the face of a number of things that you think you understand about Scripture. But the more you understand how interconnected you are to the energies, the more you will understand what you're doing, what's off as a result of your free will, because there's no interference from the intensification of all power in the universe, not even a suggestion beyond a force of benefit. What do I mean by that? How could I put this? Okay, so you have a um you have a something wrong. You're on the side of the road with your truck, right? And your vehicle's not working right. You're on the side of the road, and there is a manual that says that the thing that is wrong with the truck you could easily fix. But in your belief, you don't have to do that because you don't believe that that will fix the problem on the truck. The manual says, do this thing and your truck will run. But you say, I don't believe that's true. And so I'm not going to try it. And furthermore, I don't have to listen to the manual. In fact, my understanding is there's a better manual out there. And I just have to, I don't know, believe it. And in all of that, your truck stays on the side of the road because you, through your free will, decided that that manual was a great suggestion, but not what you wanted to do. And therefore, your truck stays broken, which means what? You rejected the force of benefit that would have prospered your journey, which means you would have gotten back on the road as a result of doing the thing that you were instructed to do to begin with. So here's the intrigue. The intensification of all power in the universe does not sit there and tell you, oh, you need to do this. Oh, you need to do this. You need to do this. You need to do this. Nope. From the beginning of the time, there is a concept of a force of benefit being communicated through light towards the concentric Elohim down to what our world exists in, right? Which is an ultimately corrupted world of 99% darkness and 1% light. And the only 1% light that exists within this realm is us. Because why? We're a manifestation of an emanation of the intensification of all power in the universe. Interpret it. And that corrupt interpretation is what has caused this to become what it is. Well, intriguingly enough, that interpretation has to do with a negation particle at every level, but I'm not going to get into that today. So why is this so important? Well, first of all, obviously, it seems as though we're a little bit off track in our thinking of who or what we are, but we're also a little bit off track in our thinking of who or what he is. And I think that probably is where we fail. When a man and a woman in the height, width, depth, time, placement step into a state of intercourse, they are demonstrating that they are Yahweh Elohim. But a manifestation of an emanation of the intensification of all power in the universe, interpreted, albeit potentially inappropriately. We can get into that. We sure can. But how many would agree at the core of even our American values is the idea that a human is supposed to be allowed to choose? Doesn't matter what the consequence is, they need permission to choose. And if they need permission to choose, and that is the ultimate concept here, then for once in my entire existence in this ministry, I can say that there was a point in time when this country was on track to demonstrate their manifestation as an Elohim, which was a result of a communication of information, which is light, that was an emanation from the intensification of all power in the universe, proving that they are gods. There's a one time that I will give credit to the American people is when we decided that a person should be able to choose their path, regardless of the consequence. Now, it is very important that part of that negation particle is Torah. And part of that negation particle is the manifestation of Torah as a result of what? An emanation of an Elohim that is feminine. Torah says, thou shalt not, and thou shalt. Both of those are defining and limiting parts of your existence. So before you think that what I just said is you have freedom of choice, period, you need to look back to the manual in the truck that's broken down that you continue to refuse to honor. And your truck continues to be broken down, and you think that you even have remotely traveled on your journey yet. Now, having said that, I think it's very important that when we get into this thought process, we need to understand that all of this is communicated in that which has been made. Now, what we need to do now is we need to go, okay, let's recap on what we've learned so far about the cycles. So first of all, in the cycle itself, do we have this present? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? And we've kind of looked over that and discussed that a little bit. But in the end, one of the things we've concluded is that it has not stopped. It continues. And if it continues, then plausibly we can conclude that if there was one Sabbath, then there's been many Sabbaths. And then the other part of that intrigue is that we've also learned that concept of Sabbath is present in a biorhythmic biofield information communication process. In other words, something within us is emanating outwards, telling everything else to have a 7-day cycle, or what we call a circaheptad rhythm, or circaheptadian rhythm, a 7-day cycle. Now, the studies that have been done on that through the National Institute of Health have demonstrated that even a blade of grass does not turn the way it usually does on a regular cycle. Now, does that say that it's Saturday? No, that's where we have to trust the preservers of Torah, the Jews, and not be anti-Semitic about it like we were in the Council of Laodicea in 336 AD, in which it said, if anyone is caught being idle like the Jews are on the 7th day, they shall have no absolution. Council of Laodicea, 336 AD. 11 years after the establishment of that ultra-pagan Christianity, we're already being anti-Semitic and saying, yeah, we don't want to be like the Jews. And anybody who's caught being like that, they're going to hell. That's right. And so what we need to do is go ahead and embrace the Torah observant preservers of Torah. Did they reject Messiah? Yes, absolutely. We have a problem there, and that's going to be dealt with. It was dealt with in me. I was born Jewish, but I can tell you right now, Yeshua is the foundation of everything that I believe. Especially because the Torah became flesh and dwelt among us. John chapter 1, verse 14. So a focus then has to be on the idea that all information coming in is as pure as it was when it first left the intensification of all power in the universe, and only a twisted mind can tweak it. What does that mean? That means that's where our preeminence of perfection comes from. Why was Yeshua able to overcome sin? Because you are. He was in all ways tempted, but did not sin, and you can be too, but you just won't do it. First of all, Torah is so completely out of the focus of almost every human being. I mean, even myself, I I would that I focused my brain more on Torah when I made decisions. But Torah is so disconnected from our existence, from our reality, that we need to get back to that first. The bride dons herself with a robe, and that robe is the righteous acts of the saints, diakomai, which is the same word that's used when it says what the law could not do, and then it was weak in the flesh, God did by sending his own son, Romans chapter 8, verse 3, on the account of sin, in the likeness of sinful flesh. And then what? That, or as a result of, or cause and effect, that the righteous requirements, the diakomai of the law might be fulfilled in us who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. Make no mistake, the bride's garments is Torah. The dragon in Revelation chapter 12 puts all of his energy into attacking those who have the testimony of Yeshua and the commandments of God. What, you think that was only the 10? You need to look back. You need to look back at Yeshua's lifestyle. Look, he's even in Jerusalem during Hanukkah. Can you stop with the idea that he just completely rejected the Pharisees and completely rejected Talmud? He's in Jerusalem for a traditions of men mandated holiday. He didn't have to follow it. You don't have to light candles in December. You don't. But why shouldn't you? When you understand the heritage behind it, when you understand the name of the actual festival. So what is the point that I made today? The point that I made today is the existence in height, width, depth, time of intercourse between a man and a woman also results in the existence in another realm that you don't understand and can't explain of Yahweh, and vice versa. They are symbiotic with each other, which is why you were able to create life at that moment. Because you are a manifestation of an emanation, which was an intention of the intensification of all power in the universe that was corrupted through interpretation of a weak mind. Now, here's the important part. I never said that it was a brain or a mind in this head or your head, but instead a realm of consciousness. And that's going to be very important in the future when we talk. But it's very important to understand we have a concept of correspondence that Paul brings up in Romans chapter 1, verse 18 and 19 and 20 that says in its paraphrase, you guys wake up, you don't get it. It really, really bothers him when you suppress the Torah because everything around you proves Torah to be true. And then I'll take it a step further. Everything you need to know about him, about power, eternal power. Let's assign some sort of definition to that. Oops, whoops, you can't. Why? Because it's eternal. Eternal power. Known through that which has been made. You can find what you need to understand about how you are supposed to be operating in all of creation, except your stubborn mind. That's it. That's the only part of creation that has a negation particle in it. Because he wants you to choose to receive with free will. So you have to say no first. You have to be stubborn first. You have to choose not to honor it first. And then over time, you learn that that's the only thing that you desired in the first place. That's the only thing that you needed in the first place. That's the only thing that is actually available to you. And then we flip over to, yes, I will receive, but I am afraid. And so only give me this much. Sound familiar? Moses, you go into that cloud and talk to that guy, because if we hear one more word from him, we're going to die. I will only allow this much. Only what I'm comfortable with. But the moment that you allow him to give, and you no longer are not trying to give him the credit, that he needs the credit, because if he doesn't get it, then that's not fair. You don't even know what fairness is when it comes to an Elohim. We focus on trying to offer something up. Stop. You do not understand sacrifices. We sing songs that give us emotional attachment to cognitive processes that are based upon confirmation bias instead upon reality, and say that we somehow had a spiritual experience, which consequently still has its merit and value, which we'll get into in the soon future, but does not equate to what he is actually doing. You cannot give. Singing a song does not give some sort of something to him. Directing your heart towards him doesn't do anything for the process. You have to receive. And if you're going to receive, then you have to become a vessel of reception. You have to be willing to be dependent upon the provision, protection, and instruction. Torah. That's the Hebrew word for instruction. So now, what do we understand now? We understand that there's a preeminence of the existence of a strong mind. In other words, we start with a strong mind. And through childhood, it becomes wounded, limited, and entitled. And as we grow into an adult, we take all of that information as frames of reference. Now we get back into neurolinguistic programming here. Neuropeptides value that with a context that is recoverable as information that then defines your reality. That's a weak mind. Wounds, entitlements, and limiting beliefs. And the intrigue is all that occurs in childhood, but we drag it into adulthood and make a mess of things as a result of it. Instead of what? Having the provision, protection, and instruction, and dwelling upon the actual existence of a strong mind as your default. How many times have you walked through your life since you heard those teachings about the strong mind and had a fearful mind, or had an anguished mind, or had an anxiety mind, or whatever mind you had, and said, I need to have a strong mind? Now, you got it mixed up. You have it and you're interfering with it. And that's key here. There is a preeminence of a strong mind that is the result, that is a manifestation, which is what? An interpretation of information communicated from what? From the intensification of all power in the universe and the Elohim, however concentric that may be. And what I mean by that, that if it is down to lower and lower and lower contractions, for example, the universe itself here in this corrupted place is simply programmed to obey you. So if you think that you need to make micro adjustments for a fear, and that micro adjustment you make for that fear communicates what you really want because you made that micro adjustment instead of telling that fear you don't want it, in comes exactly what you asked for. If you have a desire and you make micro adjustments for prosperity, not only will you be financially elite, but you will also be politically, spiritually elite. You will be elite in the things that require the kingdom of heaven, that are required for the kingdom of heaven to what? To be in existence as an entity of change upon the corruption of this realm. That's what the kingdom of heaven is. And where is the kingdom of heaven located? Within you. Well, no wonder it's all screwed up. No wonder we have Dante and Milton creating this fanatical realm of suffering because of Augustine's and Justin Martyr's and a couple other people's explanation of what they think the reality of humans is. And then they sit there and create this fanatical realm, and all of a sudden it becomes the reality of truth within the church itself, of some entity that is both preeminent, equal, and opposite to God. Total duality garbage. Has nothing to do with the idea of a greater or a lesser. And then in turn is now the ruler of this realm that is for eternal conscious suffering. You can't die, but you can suffer. My God, what a bunch of malevolence. And you accuse my intensification of all power in the universe of that. Appalling. No wonder we have the damage that we have in the information. No wonder it's corrupted. Because we got it reversed. We sit there and think that the preeminence is this thing way out here, and we don't realize that the preeminence is actually us, and that preeminence actually plays a role in the way in which humans interact with each other and the way in which this world changes. You want to become the change that this world needs, you need to become superior in your strong mind. Oh, wait a minute. That's not right. You need to allow your strong mind to do what it is already created to do. Okay? So, one last thing that I want to discuss, and that is the idea that if we have a cycle that's repeating itself, that the intensification of all power in the universe does something on and does something for, and that being the Shabbat, the 7-day cycle, proof in creation that exists, proof that you have a heptadian cycle. Yes, if you start programming it to align itself with, say, Wednesday, then you will have a 7-day cycle and you will rest, or your body will become more tired, or your body will become less willing to work on that day. But allowing our Jewish brothers to carry the torch that we so quickly and so stubbornly rejected. Sunday, or the 7th day that the Council of Laodicea speaks of, is the day in which you are supposed to have Shabbat. Activating that Shabbat through ceremony then results in a demonstration of what you actually want. Ceremony is always a question that can only be answered by information from a higher realm, and that higher realm then gives that answer. That's the concept of it happening in the natural first and then the supernatural, right? That's the concept of a terrestrial realm versus a celestial realm, a terrestrial light and a celestial light, a terrestrial glory and a celestial glory, right? Where we have this concept of information coming down from above being corrupted or misinterpreted. And so no wonder we have a religion that is progressively getting more and more and more away from its origin of Torah. Yeshua told people who did not know he was the Messiah, "You are the light of the world." John says he was not the light, but that Yeshua was the light. There's a number of ways we can interpret that, but the short one is that we can say that Yeshua said, "You are the light." Perhaps maybe what he was doing was speaking in an imperative, and that imperative is being met by the negation particle, which is you, your brain, your stubbornness. That's important because of why? Because of the echad, because of the concept of what is the connectedness between the two. We're going to understand how the masculine and feminine principle result from the preeminence of the strong mind. Okay. So I know a lot of that is probably pretty deep, and you guys are going to have a lot of questions. And for those of you who are joining us at Midrash, I'm excited. Having said that, I think it's important that if you feel like you want to be a part of the Midrash, that you contact me. Now, having said that, it's very important to understand that I'm also working on trying to get it to where I can have people come into the Midrash without having a whole lot of, having to have the password to the Zoom call, et cetera, et cetera. I'm trying to get it where you could just go click on the website and it will pop you in. But I haven't gotten there yet, and I'm working on that. Guys, stop thinking you're evil. You're not. But when you think you're evil, you will be it. Because remember, it is not what you do that defines who you are. But what you believe about yourself is exactly what you will do. And if you want to be the change that this world needs, if you want to be a part of the solution, not part of the problem, you don't want to be the guy that says, oh, you know what, when that person changes, I'll change. Oh, you know what, there's got to be a law, or there's got to be something, right? You know what, we should build a storage shed in the church. Get the building, guy, right? Instead of being a part of the problem, become a part of the solution, be the change that this world needs. Then what you need to understand is what you believe about yourself is who you are. And if you buy into Augustine's crap, you buy into that Christianity junk, that there is an original sin and that you are born evil and totally depraved, you need to do something with your life other than watch After His Heart Ministries or participate in any of it. But I can tell you this. When you are in the low of the lows, you'll realize you're not depraved. You'll realize that the connection between you and Elohim is so powerful and so amazingly changeable that you will become the change that this world needs. And I think that's the importance here. You have a preeminence of a strong mind. Let it be. Let it exist. Observe it as a strong mind. Your weak mind is a limitation, but it is not your reality. Okay?